We've already talked about some of the radical developments that took place in the 19th century, like photography, which transforms the way people visualize or see the world. But we're also going to see a change in shape of the very United States, as well as exponential population growth. So if you think about where we were in 1800, it's in 1803 that Thomas Jefferson orders the purchase negotiations, fearing that the French, who were at the time led by Napoleon, will establish an empire in North America. And so they work out this deal. The French are more than happy to sell their land to the United States. So they sell their land, the land that's between the Mississippi and the Rocky Mountains, for $15 million cash, which essentially, so right here, this will double the size of the original 13 states. So the United States is now twice as big as it had been. And of course, we know that throughout the 19th century, we will get Texas. The Mexican secession takes place after the Mexican-American War in 1848, and also by treaty with Great Britain, we get this piece of the northwestern part of the United States. This land growth is also coupled with exponential population growth. So we're talking a difference in from 1800 to 1900. We're looking at a population that is 15 times larger than it had been. So in 1800, there were 5 million Americans. By 1900, there are 76 million Americans. So not only is there more land, but there are more people. And one of those radical developments that I mentioned to you last week, which was photography, is coupled with the growth of the railroad. So if you look at this map, which starts in 1830, it moves across to 1870, and finally here 1890, you can see that there was very little railroad in 1830, and by the time you get to the end of the 19th century, there is this intricate web that can take you all the way across the United States. So people can move, mobility increases greatly. Now, with this growth in the size, with this discovery of the natural splendor of the American West, comes an interest in landscape painting. But before we get to Scenes of the West, I want to start up here in New York State, where there is a group of painters who are not part of a school. They don't attend classes, but they are called the Hudson River School because they paint in upstate New York, in and around the Hudson River. This is a valley that goes along the Hudson River. It's a very beautiful piece of landscape. And it goes all the way up into Canada, where you have Niagara Falls. So this loose grouping of artists who are painting in this region in upstate New York come to be known as the Hudson River School. Now, they're also considered romantic landscape painters. And by romantic, I don't mean candlelight dinners and roses. I mean romantic in the terms of painting, literature, and music, which in the 19th century is much more about emotional expression and feeling. So when someone says romanticism, think works that are expressive of feeling and emotion. And within this larger category of romanticism, so all of the Hudson River School painters are considered romantic painters. But within this category of romanticism, I want to show you two different types of landscape painting. Those that we'll describe as picturesque and those that we'll describe as sublime. Now, if you look at this work by John Trumbull, which is called Niagara Falls from the Upper Bank of the British Side, it's a pretty tame view of Niagara Falls, right? There are 3 people who are walking here comfortably along the shorelines. We see the top of the falls, but not the point where they break, not the crashing. It's framed by trees on either side. There's kind of balance to this painting. And we would describe this as picturesque, right? So picturesque just means like a postcard, like a picture, as though it were imagined and perfectly composed. And this one certainly is. But a number of these Hudson River schools, Thomas Cole among them, will create more dramatic views of the very same or similar landscapes. So here's Thomas Cole's distant view of Niagara Falls on the right from 1830, so it's slightly later. But notice that he's given us this frontal view of the falls. We see the crashing, we see that water that sprays up. We can almost imagine the sound of it. And whereas these people were very comfortably safe along the shoreline, there's a sense of these two Native Americans being kind of the last of their race of people standing out here rather precariously on a cliff overlooking the water. And so there's a sense of drama to it. Also, if you look at the sky and you contrast these two, notice how in Trumbull's it's quite even. The light doesn't change radically. One of the things that we see with sublime romantic paintings is a use of dramatic colors, dramatic skies to create a mood. There's kind of a heaviness, a darkness that perhaps hangs over the side of these Native Americans who are, struggling to hold on to their land at this point in time. But there's also that sense, that glimmer of hope that comes from that little light that is peeking through beyond the clouds. So when we talk about romantic painting, both of these would be examples of it. But the work by Trumbull is definitely picturesque in the sense that it feels safe and composed and postcard-like. And the drama, when we say it's sublime, we're referring to this awe-inspiring sense of nature that we have. The sense that it's more powerful than we are, that man is really quite small in comparison to the vast greatness and power of nature. So this is a great example of sublime. And I want you to remember this because I'm going to show you one of Thomas Cole's students in just a bit, and he will take this idea of sublime even further into the future. Now, on that list of key terms, you may have also noticed that I had the term manifest destiny there. That is probably a term that you're already familiar with. It was a 19th century idea that was largely held by many Americans, and it was this idea that Americans of European descent had this kind of God-given right to develop the West, to move out there, to take the lands from the Native American people who were already there, and build communities, build homes, and so on. That it was manifest, that it was like a God-given right, and this was our destiny, to take the West. There were very few people in the 19th century who questioned that, but Thomas Cole, whose work I'm showing you here, is one of few figures who does begin to talk about that. In fact, he writes an essay, which is called... what is the title of the actual essay? It's called An Essay on American Scenery. And he says this, quote, "The ravages of the axe are daily increasing. The most noble scenes are made destitute, and oftentimes with a wantonness and barbarism scarcely credible in a civilized nation." So Thomas Cole is exceptional that as a landscape painter, he's questioning that rapid development. Is it good development? Is it well thought out? Is it just barbaric to continue to take these lands? So there are a couple things I want you to notice in this painting. One is that it's divided clearly, right? There's this kind of, if you read this as a map, this would be the east and this would be the west, right? And he makes it very clear that the eastern side of this river, this is an actual bend in the Connecticut River, by the way, is well developed. You can see that the land has been parceled out. People are growing things in various patches of land here. But on the western side, we see this wild, untamed nature. So you can read this work as a kind of metaphor for the United States at this moment in the 1830s and what's going on. What's also really interesting is the sky, of course, which hopefully gives you the clue that this is a great example of sublime, that dramatic sky with changing weather, that seems to suggest that this side is doomed, that there's a kind of heaviness, a dark cloud, literally, that hangs over this side of the painting, whereas there's this clearing, this clarity that sits on the side of civilized nature. What's also really interesting is that if you look very closely, you may notice that Thomas Cole has included himself in this painting. Can you find him? It might be hard to do. If I zoom in and then I go back out, you may notice that right here there's an umbrella that's planted right by this rock. And you can see that he's planted that umbrella there. And then he's climbed down to this little point. He's set up an easel. He's wearing a top hat. So let me zoom in. There it is in close up. And he shows himself, he's looking back at us, but yet he's painting this landscape. So this is the detail of the right side of the painting, and this is the detail of the left side of the painting. So there he is right there. And it's notable that he identifies with the West, with protecting it. And it coincides or is consistent with what he wrote in that essay on American scenery, where he talks about how quickly this development is taking place and expresses concern for this rapid loss of nature.